My name is Isabela Cruz. I was 28 years old, and in front of 42 guests at a philanthropic gala, my employer pointed at me and called me a maid, as if that was an insult meant to erase everything I had built in private and everything I had invested in public life. The room hummed with champagne glasses and small talk, the chandelier throwing light across sequined dresses and crisp tuxedos, and his voice cut through like ice. He said the word maid as if it summed me up, and as if 27 years of work outside their kitchen was meaningless. 72 hours later, a CEO I barely knew stood up at a hotel boardroom and announced in a voice that filled the room that I would be taking his place as interim chief executive officer for 30 days, while his team audited a partner contract. The silence on my employer's face was the first proof that the thing I had kept quiet was more powerful than his public performance. If you are watching this, tell me where you are in the comments and whether you have ever been dismissed by someone who lived under the same roof as you. I grew up in one house and built a life in another. For years, I scrubbed baseboards by day and debugged back-end services by night. I paid a third of the rent for the townhouse I shared with two roommates while compiling code in the laundry room, and I paid the tuition for my nephew with tips I earned from private events. They asked me to transfer equity in a small family holding as a favor to a cousin and called it family solidarity. They did not know that the code I wrote for weekends powered a logistics platform used by 3 regional retailers, and that I had a verified corporate badge linked to a product suite used by one of the partners at the gala. In this story, I will show how an insult meant to erase me triggered a chain of paperwork, camera footage, and emails that turned humiliation into a public exposure that cost one man his deal and gave me an opportunity I had not expected. Stay with me until the end because the hotel signing and what came afterward will show you why documenting your work and keeping your proof is not paranoia, it is protection. We lived in the same house for 5 years. James Halverson was technically my employer as the owner of the private service company that sent me to his family home. But by the time I had been there 3 years, he treated me like part of the furniture, like a clock that kept ticking, and like someone whose voice could be turned off at dinner. I cleaned the guest bathrooms, polished silverware for their parties, and made sure the kids' uniforms were ironed for school. I also sat in the corner of the family office with a laptop and worked on a project that started as a side gig and became my lifeline. I had network credentials for a cloud console and a corporate email address for a startup where I was a product manager under a different name. I used the house Wi-Fi to deploy updates at midnight. My life was split between a uniform and a hoodie. The house smelled of lemon cleaner, old books, and fried onions most afternoons. The textures of my life were contradictory. The soft terry cloth of the towels I folded, and the hard cold of the server racks, screenshots I kept on a USB drive tucked into the lining of a jacket. I paid the bills of the household, occasional small repairs, and the monthly subscription for an accounting tool no one appreciated. I felt invisible in the sweetest and angriest ways. As a child, I learned to listen before speaking. My mother taught me to make coffee and to tuck small receipts into a worn envelope for rainy days. I went to community college, studied information systems, and took night courses in human-centered design while working double shifts on Saturdays. I lost a scholarship because of a clerical error and then reclaimed the opportunity by building a prototype for a local nonprofit that tracked donations. I learned to translate technical terms into plain language to convince people who had never logged into a dashboard that data could be trusted. My first mentor, Priya Shah, taught me how to write a 1-page product brief and to name the problem we were solving. Priya put my name on an internal wire when her team needed a contractor to stabilize an onboarding flow, and from there, I worked nights and holidays writing APIs and drafting presentations. In the mornings, I scrubbed counters. At midnight, I pushed commits. I learned to switch between accents and registers, the one that soothed a worried client on a call, and the one that politely accepted that my employer had left my paycheck short. I built a secret resume of contributions that fit inside a stick of gum wrapper because nothing official ever matched the work I did. The man who humiliated me had his own backstory of power. Martin Halverson was a second-generation investor who had built a reputation for Baroque hospitality and public gestures of generosity. He had a foundation, a board seat at a private museum, and a policy of hosting dinners where deals were whispered beneath linen napkins. In business, he was skilled at optics and charm, at masking entitlement as stewardship. He had learned to conflate loyalty with obedience. When a contract needed to be smoothed, he preferred a handshake, not a clause. He believed that family was a currency that could settle messy legal scripts. At his best, he donated to causes and smiled warmly at cameras. At his worst, he treated people as entries in a ledger to be moved around when convenient. He had a history of arranging transfers of nominal ownership to avoid small tax burdens and of calling favors in ways that required silence. That pattern of control created the environment in which my evidence was both necessary and dangerous. The day that started the spiral was a small thing at first. A draft email arrived from a partner asking for a final signature, authorizing a software licensing agreement that would integrate our sponsor with 3 distribution centers. Martin asked me to sign a short power of attorney to handle an administrative transfer as a family favor, a paper note that would allow his nephew to be the named contact for a shell company he controlled. He asked me in the kitchen while I rinsed plates, and his voice was light, joking, casual. His words felt like a command disguised as a favor. I remember the clink of the faucet, the metallic taste of cleaning soap in my mouth, the hum of the refrigerator, and the sound of his shoes tapping the tile. I said no. He laughed and made a joke about gratitude and family roles, and the way he said it in front of his guests at the gala a few nights later turned that private refusal into a spectacle. My refusal at the sink was the spark. I had no idea then it would land me at the center of a hotel conference room weeks later. The family gala was a borrowed luxury. The tablecloths smelled of starch and lemon, the servers moved in a practiced choreography, and the silverware felt heavy in my hands because I had imagined myself on the other side of that room many times. At the table with 42 guests, there were investors, journalists, and friends of the Halverson Circle. As the main course was cleared, my employer raised his glass and pointed at me. I felt the bright flash of the chandelier on my shoulder, the pressure in my throat, and the way the room seemed to tilt. Lucia's laughter came out like a report of a bell. Daniel Martin's son across the table smiled with a half expression, as if he were deciding which side to be on. He spoke in a voice that was calm with a clinical edge. He said, "You know, you will sign that equity over to my cousin because you owe us for the work you do." The term Maid was not a statement of fact, it was a weapon. A cluster of smartphone cameras caught his posture, and a few guests began to murmur. Glass chimed against glass like a distant fall. My palms smelled of the citrus cleaner I had used that afternoon. The next scene unfolded in a corporate way I had learned to navigate. I had copies of emails and a badge that proved I had access to a partner portal. My proof was humble: screenshots, server logs, a badge photo, and a sequence of time-stamped commits that showed I had been the one to stabilize an outage on a holiday weekend. Those documents were ordinary for a developer, but urgent for a human being whose identity was being erased. I had a mentor, Priya, who happened to be friends with a venture partner, Marcus Cole, who trusted her judgment. Priya read my emails and saw the pattern. Thomas Reed, a lawyer who had represented my client pro bono, told me that if the family moved to transfer equity without proper authorization, the transaction could be voided because the corporate bylaws required unanimous consent from a specific committee. Aaron Brooks, the in-house counsel at the partner firm, agreed to preserve emails and inventory. The combination of logs and legal timing was not flashy, but it mattered. I copied files into a secure folder, sent them to Marcus, and texted Priya at 2 a.m. while the house was quiet and the refrigerator hummed like a distant engine. She replied with a single line, "Call me tomorrow." On a Sunday morning in a small coffee shop, Priya and Marcus looked at the timeline and realized that a signature at a formal signing could be interrupted if the partner demanded to see the person who held the production key. That realization was the pivot. Dialogues in that week felt like a courtroom in miniature. In the coffee shop, the conversation between me, Priya, Marcus, Thomas, and Aaron was long and textured, and it looked like this. I said, "I do not want revenge. I just want my work recognized." Priya said, "Recognition has an economy of its own, and we are going to spend it wisely." Marcus said, "If we show the partner the access logs, they will pause." Thomas said, There is a clause in the partnership agreement that requires verification of contributors, and that clause can be enforced if we file an injunction. Aaron said, filing would be fast, but we would need to move evidence onto a secure server and serve notice before the signing. I said, what about the family fallout? Priya said, we will manage the optics. We will make the narrative about transparency, not about betrayal. Marcus said, the partner values continuity and will not sign if the responsible technologist is not present. Aaron said, I will draft the notice tonight and send it to Marcus. I said, how will I walk into a room where 42 people saw me as a servant and not as an engineer? Priya touched my hand and said, you will walk in as the person who saved the product, and that will change how they see you. Marcus said, we will do this carefully and make sure the journalist Emily Ward knows the truth if things go sideways. In that coffee shop, we planned a gentle avalanche. I prepared my proof carefully. The evidence package included server logs, emails labeled with timestamps, screenshots of badges, and a copy of an employment agreement that showed my contracting work for a vendor who performed maintenance for the partner. The technical explanation we prepared needed to be clear and concise. The clause it issued demanded explicit sign-off from the platform owner on any reallocation of ownership and specified that the platform owner must be notified 30 days in advance to allow for compliance audits. In plain terms, the clause prevented last-minute transfers of operational control without documented sign-off. The legal summary I handed to Aaron was 3 paragraphs and a 30-second talking point for the partner to ask for a verification call. I backed up the timeline with camera footage from the gala footage that showed the point at which Martin made the remark. I emailed the partner with a neutral subject line and attached a short statement indicating that the person listed as a point of contact needed to be present at the signing because of technical responsibilities. The days before the hotel signing were full of small sensory moments. I slept in a spare room in the home I worked at and woke to the smell of toast every morning. The lighting in the spare room was soft and the mattress was thin, but it was a place to gather my thoughts. I packed a blazer that did not belong to anyone else, a blouse that hid my fingerprints, and a USB drive in the lining of a tote bag. I felt the fabric of the tote rough against my palm, the weight of the documents heavy in the pocket, and the metallic click of the elevator in the hotel where the signing would take place. I rehearsed what I would say in the mirror at midnight with the hum of a refrigerator as my soundtrack. At the hotel lobby, the marble floor had a distant chill, the air smelled of polished wood and detergent, and people shuffled with a kind of quiet determination. I walked into the ballroom with Priya, Marcus, and Aaron at my side, and the world outside felt like a different economy. The signing event was staged under soft lights with a long table and company logos on a screen. 200 people had gathered, investors, partners, and legal counsels. I remember the way the carpet felt under my pumps, the cool metal of a water glass, the faint perfume of a woman passing a row in front of me. The partner took the stage to sign, and the representative asked for the person responsible for platform operations. A murmuring crept through the room like a wind through a field. Martin blinked as if he could not find his lines. The room that once held my humiliation now had the potential to witness a reversal. At this point, the dialogue in the ballroom between officials and me ran long and direct, with 8 exchanges that stretched the moment as if elastic. The partner representative said, "Who will take responsibility for the integration?" I said, "I will," and I placed the USB with logs on the table. He said, "We need a demonstration of access." I handed him a terminal printout, and he said, "Where did you get these credentials?" I said, "I was the person who handled the deployment the weekend the system went down, and the commit history is timestamped with my user ID. He said, "Did you have authorization legally?" Aaron said, "We served notice this morning, and the partner counsel confirmed receipt." The partner counsel said, "We need to pause the signature until verification is complete." Marcus said, "We can provide a brief audit in 30 minutes. Emily, the journalist, asked for a statement, and Priya provided one. The room shifted, and the cameras that had once captured me as background now framed me as the subject. Each exchange tightened the knot of consequence until the partner chose to delay the signature, and an audible collective intake of breath filled the room. The technical description I provided at the hotel was precise and short to be digestible for a non-technical audience. The log sequence showed failed authentication attempts at 02-1347 and a rollback executed at 02-1904 with my user ID as the last committer. The platform owner clause requires documented sign-off and 96-hour notice for operational changes, and the timestamped commits establish continuity of responsibility. In essence, the evidence created a temporal chain linking me to the production environment during the precise period that mattered. This explanation in 3 lines made and unmade assumptions about who did the work. The immediate fallout was dramatic. The partner withdrew from the signing and postponed the contract pending an audit. Market chatter moved faster than formal press releases, and within 24 hours, 3 smaller vendors publicly suspended negotiations with Martin Halverson-related entities. The boutique investment fund that had come to the gala to toast potential synergies pulled their letter of intent. Social media threads captured the video of the gala moment and juxtaposed clips of me handing over the drive in the hotel. Headlines used words like accountability and trustee, and the Halverson name appeared next to phrases like governance review. Marcus reported to me that a lead investor had called to ask if the family had been transparent about contributors. Priya fielded a request from a journalist, Emily Ward, who wanted to run an in-depth piece. Thomas worked the filings to ensure that any attempted transfer without notarized committee consent would be flagged. The market impact had numbers that mattered. A projected partnership of $8 million in annual revenue evaporated from the firm pipeline, and a boutique PR firm recommended that the family issue a statement about internal controls. Daniel issued a brief apology on social media that read like a draft from a publicist, and Lucia posted a vague note about respect and family values. The board of the partner company announced an internal review, and Martin was placed on leave pending an investigation. At the same time, there was a personal collapse and a public elevation. People I had worked with in secret called to congratulate me and also to say that they were surprised. Grace Lopez, a former colleague from the vendor, sent a message that read, "You finally get to see them listen." Marcus introduced me to the partner counsel, who questioned in detail the commit history. Aaron advised me about limits and protective orders. Priya reminded me to breathe. There were also brutal messages from some guests I had served and from acquaintances who felt betrayed that I had not disclosed my work sooner. I received a call from a woman named Emily from a local newspaper who wanted a quote, and another from an old client who asked about freelance rates. For every message of support, there were 2 that suggested I should have stayed in my place. Those messages were sharp, and they landed like small cuts, but they did not define the outcome. The weeks that followed were about choices. The CEO, Robert Hale, whose company had partnered with Martin, had observed the pause in the signing and reached a decision that would change my trajectory. He invited me to a meeting and did not speak to me as a maid or a scandal participant, but as a professional. His act was simple and bold. He offered me the interim CEO position for 30 days to oversee the audit and to stabilize client relations while his operational team completed verification. He said it would be a test and an opportunity, and that if I performed, the firm would discuss a long-term role. When he told the board, they nearly objected until he laid out the legal safeguards and the optics and reminded them that continuity and technical credibility mattered more than tradition. The conversation in the boardroom had 9 exchanges and was meticulous. Robert said, "The market expects competence, not pedigree." I said, "I need a secure contract and protection against retaliation." He said, "We will put a clause that prevents any family member from bringing private litigation against you for actions taken in good faith." Aaron drafted protective language and Thomas reviewed it. The clause included limited indemnity, a non-retaliate clause, and a confidentiality proviso that would be void if malicious prosecution occurred. The contract length was short and precise, and the terms were supportive enough for me to accept. The legal clause I insisted upon, and that Thomas wrote down, was clear and enforceable in plain terms. It stated that Isabela Cruz would be appointed interim CEO with indemnity for actions taken within the scope of duties. Indemnity would cover legal fees up to a capped amount, and any attempted retaliatory litigation by named family members would be treated as bad faith and subject to sanctions. It also required the company to maintain an escrow for operational liabilities for the audit period. These protections were not theatrical, they were practical, and they allowed me to assume responsibility. Without personal legal exposure. My first day as interim CEO began with sensory overload. The office smelled like brewed coffee and toner, the elevator chimed softly, and the badge that had once been proof of a contractor role now dangled with a different weight on its strap. I sat at a large table with Robert, Priya, Marcus, Aaron, and a small team of engineers. The screen showed dashboards with lines of outages and customer ticket queues, the air conditioning hummed like a steady engine, and the plastic of the chair left a faint impression on my palms. I felt both like an imposter and like someone finally authorized to speak. The first team meeting involved technical triage and public messaging. I listened, then spoke with a cadence I had practiced in front of the mirror. In that week, the dialogues were dense with operational instructions and public relations strategy. I spoke with the head of engineering, Grace, about remediation timelines, and she said we can isolate the release in 4 hours if we freeze new deployments. I told the comms team to prepare a neutral statement prioritizing transparency. A client asked for reassurance, and I scheduled a call. Marcus negotiated with investors to keep the credit line open while the audit ran. Each meeting required me to translate technical detail into business assurance and to hold firm while under public scrutiny. I read heavy documents and explained logs in plain language to board members who had never seen a terminal. The tension in those moments was thick and real and consumed both my energy and my attention. There were several moments of tension that required private reflection and decision. One such moment was when Daniel called me and accused me of betrayal and begged me to reverse the pause. I felt a rush of childhood memories of being taught to put others before myself and of the voice that always told me to be small. I remembered my mother folding napkins and the way she told me to keep my head down. In the quiet of the kitchen, I thought about the costs of silence and the possibility of living a life where my contributions were invisible. The decision to stay and to accept the interim role was not clean, nor was it purely opportunistic. It was a choice to align my public actions with my private work. Another tension came when a senior investor threatened to withdraw if the company did not replace me with someone from the existing executive suite. That conversation forced me to argue with authority, with data, and with moral clarity to insist that continuity and competence beat cosmetic choices. I had to speak like a leader and to tolerate being perceived as abrasive for the first time in my life. Those moments activated memories of nights alone in a laundry room with a laptop and a single lamp and made me aware that the stakes were both personal and structural. Public reaction varied. Emily Ward published a feature that focused on governance and on the strange arc from domestic work to corporate leadership. Headlines framed the story as a test of values, and investors read the feature as a case study. Social media debates erupted about class and recognition. Some commentators made the narrative about spectacle, while others focused on the legal and operational issues that had forced the pause. The partner company launched an internal audit, and within days, the regulatory reviewer asked for a statement about approval processes. The family narrative fractured. Martin issued a brief apology that read like damage control, and Lucia removed comments from her social channels. Daniel tried to reconcile with a note offering to meet, which I refused at first. The partner not only halted the signature, they asked for a full audit of the chain of custody for operational control, which validated the necessity of my presence at the signing. By the end of 30 days, the audit had been completed, and it revealed procedural lapses and a pattern of informal transfers that violated internal compliance guidelines. The partner cited the lapse in internal controls as the reason for pausing the partnership, and negotiations resumed only after the creation of a remediation plan. Robert Hale named me permanent in a role that combined product oversight with client relations and offered a compensation package that included stock options, a signing bonus, and a pathway to lead the platform team. He said his company valued demonstrable leadership and that my performance during the audit had proven exactly that. The market reaction was tangible. The immediate damage to Martin's reputation was real. He stepped down from a foundation board, and multiple partners severed ties with entities he controlled. In a week, the boutique fund that had withdrawn reconsidered once the public audit confirmed the rationale for the pause, and a different set of partners signed on under newly instituted governance terms. The consequences were heavy, and they were clean in some respects and messy in others. The epilogue spans months and shows how public exposure reshapes private ties. 1 month later, my life had altered in measurable ways. I had a secure office, access to benefits, and a calendar full of meetings. The company had issued a public notice about leadership changes and had published a redacted summary of the audit. My name appeared in trade publications, and client teams reached out to offer contracts and collaborations. I still received rude messages, but their volume decreased. I had set boundaries with Martin, and Lucia had requested a mediated conversation that I had declined because I needed space. I used some of my signing bonus to secure a small apartment and to hire a counselor recommended by Priya. The apartment smelled like fresh paints and coffee in the mornings and had shelves for books I had been saving. I felt a cautious relief and a recognition that the old rhythms of service had been replaced by new ones of leadership. I started mentoring 2 young women from my neighborhood on coding and product design and felt a new form of purpose. 3 months after the signing, the situation had evolved into institutional change. The company I led published formal governance procedures and initiated a training program for operational handoffs. We created a small grant in the name of a community partner to sponsor scholarships for students pursuing technical education. Priya joined the advisory board, and Marcus remained a key investor. Emily ran a follow-up piece that highlighted systemic issues in family-run entities and called our work a case study in professionalization. Martin had not regained his public footing and had quietly resigned from several appointments. Daniel reached out for a conversation that began with apology and ended with an offer to fund a community program in the neighborhood. I accepted, but with conditions, including evidence of sustained action and not only statements. Professionally, we signed a 2-year contract that formalized my position and provided a pathway to a permanent executive role. I continued to mentor and to speak about the practical steps for people who found themselves in similar situations. 6 months later, the landscape felt more settled, and my own life had taken on new contours. The platform had stabilized, and clients expressed renewed confidence. The company prepared for a small-scale strategic investment, and I led the product due diligence. In my personal life, I had bought a modest used car with a loan I managed, and I set up a foundation account to formalize the scholarship work we began. Marcus and Priya co-authored a white paper on operational accountability in family-affiliated partnerships, and I was credited for helping to draft the practical checklist that regulators used informally. I had a scheduled monthly lunch with Priya and a quarterly review with Robert about career trajectory. Martin had limited contact, and our interactions were mediated through counsel. I had accepted a single casual coffee with Lucia under the condition of a signed agreement to attend family counseling and a public apology. The boundaries I set were both protective and generous. I had gained a platform and a voice, but I had not become indifferent to the complexities of family ties. I measured gains in both dollars and in dignity. The scholarship fund supported 3 students in technical training, and the community workshops had reached over 100 attendees. I was no longer invisible. The phrase, "when they told me to stay in my place, I built a place of my own," became something I repeated to groups as a guide and a warning. If you are watching and you feel unseen, here are practical steps that helped me document and protect my work. Keep time-stamped records of your contributions, use personal storage that you control, maintain copies of communications, insist on written agreements, and involve third-party witnesses when possible. Name colleagues who can verify your role, and do not be afraid to ask for legal advice when a family favor conflicts with contractual obligations. Protect your identity with simple, secure backups, and keep a concise 1-page summary of your responsibilities that you can share when needed. If you have been in my position, write in the comments, start with "I was there" or "I was not," and tell me the city where you are watching. I will read many of them and share a few in future posts to help others who need concrete examples. If this story resonated and you want more breakdowns of legal protections and practical templates for documenting contributions, consider subscribing for more case studies and resources. When they said I should stay small, I chose to show up large and accountable. The cost was real, but the outcome was a set of concrete changes for my career and for others who were in the margins. I lost easy access to certain family comforts, but I gained a role that allowed me to influence systems rather than be contained by them. I gained financial stability, a modest home, and a voice at a table where decisions about the platform were made. I also learned to name limits and to require evidence of change before reopening old doors. Document everything. Do not accept verbal assumptions and treat your work as property you have a right to protect. When they told me to remain invisible, I built a position that made my contributions undeniable and that kept my dignity intact. If you want to follow more stories like this, subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and write below where you are watching from and whether you have ever been asked to give up what you earned without paperwork.